Okay, thanks everyone for joining us today. This webinar is many months in the making, and we're going to be speaking about the benefits and findings from our recent white paper, which focuses on reforesting former mine lands through the carbon market. And just to get us started briefly, my name is Dombrowski. I am the Carbon Removal Fellow with Appalachian Voices this year, and I'm also joined by Alayna Chuney, representing Carbon 180, and Adam Wells, who many of you may know at Appalachian Voices. Would you all like to introduce yourselves?
Go for it, Alayna. And Diana, your slides aren't showing up. I don't know if you need one more button.
Oh, sorry.
It's a loading screen.
Oh, well, I'll stop the share now and work that out while those take place.
Hi, everyone. My name is Alayna Chuney, and I am the Deputy Director of our Environmental Justice Program at Carbon 180. I've been at Carbon 180 for almost 2 years, and we are a nonprofit organization that focuses on removing carbon dioxide, or rather, we call it legacy emissions, from the atmosphere. So we're looking at existing carbon dioxide that's in the atmosphere, and we remove it. And we do this by making sure that equity and justice are at the forefront of our work. So very excited to be here. And Adam, I'll pass it to you.
Okay. Diana, it's fine, and then
it goes out.
And it goes away.
Oh, okay. Well, maybe we can get someone else to bring that up, because it shows without issue on my computer. Sorry, everyone, for the tech difficulty.
It wouldn't be a webinar without one.
Right.
Hey, y'all. Adam Wells. I'm a Regional Director of Community Economic Development for Appalachian Voices, based in our Norton, Virginia office. Lead our new economy program, which I'm about to talk about in some of the next slides. That's my introduction for now. Is my screen showing okay?
Yes, it is.
We can see that, Adam.
Okay, great. And still okay?
Yep.
There we are. Okay. Back to you, Diana.
Great, thank you, Adam. Just to take everyone through an overview of where we'll be going today, we're going to get into sharing with you all that this partnership between Appalachian Voices and Carbon 180 is founded on environmental justice, and speak a little bit more about the results of what we've been able to do together. We'll also talk about just the basics of carbon removal to make sure everyone is on the same page, and then explore the major findings of our paper, which are related to reforestation, specifically native species, and the forestry reclamation approach, how carbon sequestration is monitored, reported, and verified, and what types of multi-benefits could be possible for Central Appalachia with a project like this, social, economic, and environmental. And then we'll have a Q&A following the presentation. So with that, I'll hand it to Adam.
Great. Thanks, Diana, and thanks everybody. Really appreciate y'all being with us this afternoon. So just a little bit about Appalachian Voices and how we got to this point where we're looking at carbon removal in this context. So Appalachian Voices is a 26-year-old regional nonprofit, started in Boone, North Carolina. We now have offices as well as Boone in Norton, Virginia, Charlottesville, Virginia, Knoxville, Tennessee, Durham, and then folks working remotely across the region. Our new economy program is based out of our Norton office that was started in 2015 to help rebuild generative economies to diversify in the wake of the coal economy collapse. And then we have another program that I'll mention, which is our coal impacts program, which is one of our original ones that works to reduce and eliminate the negative impacts of coal mining on communities and individuals, ecosystems in Central Appalachia. I'll talk more about that in the next slide. Our new economy program uses two key pathways to build that economic development. One is renewable energy as an economic catalyst. The second is the cleanup and redevelopment of coal impacted lands. And so that's how we got into this carbon space. It really is a brand new space for us as an organization. So we talk about it. Let's see if that picture. Okay. So this is going on our coal impact side. We're looking at a new era of abandoned mine lands that will be happening in Central Appalachia as the coal economy continues to decline. There's a really great report that our colleague Aaron Savage released a couple of years ago that goes into great detail. The summary of it is there's going to be this new wave of abandoned mine lands because there's going to be a bonding crisis where coal companies are not going to be able to clean up mines that they're legally required to, and there won't be enough bonding or state funds or federal funds to do it. So for this conversation, the key point is that there's going to be thousands and thousands of acres of mine land in Central Appalachia that need to be reclaimed, and there's not any source of funding for those mines. And our analysis is that that's a problem that is happening now. It's unfolding in real time. The question is, how bad will it be? It's not if it's going to happen. It's really a question of scale. So we've been working as a team to try and figure out how do we address that challenge of that coal bonding crisis, as we call it. We're working on a policy level to try and make federal funds available to do that cleanup, but we recognize that that's a long game and won't be able to fix everything. And so how we got involved in the carbon work is started to ask the question of, would it be possible to create a model where we're tapping into the voluntary carbon market through doing really high quality restoration and reforestation projects on mine lands and generate enough revenue to pay for that reclamation. And as Diana will get into in greater detail, we know that trees can grow on mine land that's been established. There's been a lot of great work to demonstrate that. And there's been a lot of great work to date over the last 10 or 20 years around the carbon markets in this context. And really the question is the market at a point now where this would be something that is economically viable? So I think that tees it up. I will save the rest of the thunder for Diana. And just to seg into Alayna's piece, really excited to be working with Carbon 180. They reached out to us as they were launching this EJ cohort that I'm sure Alayna will go into in more detail. So that's been what has been funding this work so far and really helping us to learn a lot, both from the folks at Carbon 180 as well as the cohort that we're really excited to be a part of. So I'll hand it to you, Alayna.
Cool. So I'm just going to talk briefly about Carbon 180 and where equity and justice fits in with carbon removal and how we got to this regranting work. So at Carbon 180, we have been thinking deeply about the nexus of carbon removal and environmental justice or responsible deployment of carbon removal projects. So our environmental justice initiative was founded on two things. The first thing was the moral imperative that carbon removal not only addresses carbon emissions, but also improves the well-being of communities. And the second thing was that a growing recognition of the need to center equity and justice within the carbon removal field to gain community acceptance and to deploy projects that are ultimately supported by the community. So we believe that in order for carbon removal to work, communities have to have that buy-in and communities need to be included in this conversation, which leads me to our regranting efforts. We received funding from the Chan Zuckerberg Initiative to essentially give back to EJ organizations. And the interesting thing about the funding was that the funding could be used for general purposes, It wasn't primarily restricted to carbon removal. And our only ask as an organization was that whoever received the funding from Carbon 180, they would be open to learn about carbon removal. So at Carbon 180, we believe that ultimately communities should decide if carbon removal is something that works for them and what type of projects they would like to see in their community, which is how we got involved with App Voices. They were interested, and it was a great partnership that happened because for them, they're like, okay, we aren't too sure about, the technological aspects of carbon removal, but we do know we have this mine reclamation issue, and trees are a great source for both restoring mines and for actually helping with carbon removal. So we have just been supportive of their project and the idea, and they came up with this on their own. And yeah, I just want to thank you all for how we started and where we are now. And I'm so excited to hear about the white paper.
Wonderful. Thanks, Alayna. I think with that, I'm going to lead us into just some basics about nature-based carbon removal, basically what we've learned from Carbon 180 and then our own additional research over the last year. So we'll go into this nature-based concept and then speak specifically about what forestry has to do with that, and also into the details of what a carbon market is. So Adam, if you could take us to the next slide. Thank you. To start off, I want to be clear about what carbon removal is and what carbon removal is not. So many people in the audience might be familiar with perhaps the term carbon removal. Maybe you've also heard the term carbon capture, and those are very distinct ideas. So they're very distinct processes as well, because removal deals with taking carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere that's already been emitted, and carbon capture is based at point sources that blocks carbon dioxide from being emitted into the atmosphere. So those are two very different things. And then when we're speaking about carbon removal, you see this example here on the left, and that's what we'll be talking about today, is really a nature-based solution. There is direct air capture technology in the works. That's not online right now. And our focus of our work and also of this white paper is really on the nature-based solution, not anything to do with engineering. This is all based in forestry principles that folks have been studying for many decades, especially as related to Central Appalachia. So with that, if we could go into the next slide. Speaking a little bit about what nature-based really means, a nature-based solution in the context of carbon removal is rooted in conserving, restoring, better managing ecosystems to increase their capacity to pull carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. You can see the map here on the slide. It's a little small, but what I really want you to get out of this, which is a map provided by the Forest Service, is the dark blue areas, because you'll see Central Appalachia represented there in dark blue, showing that nationally, this region is capable and already removes some of the most carbon dioxide of forest land around the country. So that makes it a really rich opportunity to pursue a project like this here. And going on to the next slide. Here is a representation of what carbon removal looks like in the context of forestry from start to finish. So when we talk about mine land in particular, mine land needs to undergo reclamation, and that includes remediating soil. That includes planting native species. That includes using proper planting techniques. And then after trees are in the ground, when they grow up over the course of many decades, they'll remove carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. That CO2 is stored in tree biomass as well as soil. And over the course of years, measurement, reporting, and verification takes place on this land that measures and tracks how much CO2 is removed. When we have a project plan in place and can submit that to a verifier, there are a couple different verifiers, and carbon sequestration is verified. Carbon credits are then released, which can be sold on a marketplace. And the funds that come back from that can benefit local communities in our research and through what we've explored in a couple different ways. And that includes where the money goes, as well as ecosystem and environmental benefits. So that's the sort of chain that we're talking about when it comes to nature-based carbon removal. Adam, Alayna, anything to add? Lovely. Okay. All right. So now that we have this picture of the general concepts in mind, I want to dive into reforestation, talking a little bit more about what reclamation means, how native species can be replanted and what we know about the best ways to do that, and also the science about measuring, reporting, and verifying carbon sequestration in general, and then also specifically on former mine land. So Adam, moving forward. Thanks. So speaking about reforestation on former mine land, work has been done already on this. A carbon dioxide project would not reinvent any wheel when it comes to reforesting mine land. The Appalachian Regional Reforestation Initiative is a program of the Office of Surface Mining Reclamation and Enforcement, and it provides guidelines for the best practices for reforesting mine land. That includes remediating the growth medium. That means addressing and sampling the soil for things like pH. That means addressing any soil compaction that might take place. It includes planting native species, and it includes using proper planting techniques that are suitable to different types of environmental conditions. So knowing that reforestation takes place all over Central Appalachia right now, but not at the scale that reclamation really needs to be happening, we can also look at the science of what sequestration would really mean and how much can take place on mine land, knowing that there are different ways site quality might be degraded. So reforestation is possible. And from what we've been able to learn, carbon sequestration is possible on mine land because trees can grow there. And at about 2/3, somewhere upwards of 2/3 of carbon is sequestered on mine land when compared to non-mine land. So that's a great deal. There's a lot that's possible with reclamation that would then set up a great reforestation initiative. And speaking of reforestation, I want to thank Green Forest Work. You'll see a lot of their photos throughout this presentation, and they are experts in this area of reforesting, replanting, remediating mine land in Appalachia. With that, Adam, we'll move to the carbon project requirements of a reforestation initiative. So it's great to reforest mine land. What do we need to demonstrate to verifiers that this is a high quality project with a lot of integrity that investors might be interested in and that local community members support? So here are a couple of the key ideas that accompany a high quality credit. One of them is additionality. Additionality is a concept demonstrating that carbon sequestered on land would not happen without project funds. In different types of forestry work, this can be a little difficult to prove, but not when it comes to reforesting mine land in Appalachia. There are a couple different types of forestry projects. You can plant trees where there were none before. You could improve management of a forest that already exists, or you could reforest land. which is what we're speaking about today. And when it comes to mine land, there is already plant matter on mine land, but when it comes to like grassland or maybe invasive species like autumn olive, but the biomass, which is what verifiers are looking for, the amount of CO2 in a tree, is nothing compared to that amount. So it's really easy to demonstrate that a reforestation project is going to prove additionality, because trees aren't able to grow on this land without active intervention. So that's something that's a big benefit to our project, is knowing that that is going to be easy to demonstrate from the get-go. And that's really important to investors as well. We're also thinking about permanence, and that is the long-term goals of this project, as well as the kind of structure that's put in place to guarantee there isn't a disturbance or disruption on this land. That includes land ownership. It also includes plans for what happens to trees that are on this land, because trees live and they die. And the carbon dioxide that's stored in those trees needs to be accounted for. In some cases, project managers address this by regularly harvesting trees, and then that demonstrates that carbon dioxide is used maybe for building material. Well, carbon dioxide will stay in the tree matter and then is used for something like building materials. So that sort of thing needs to be in place from the beginning when project managers are thinking about a really high quality project. And if we could just skip back, Adam, to one more thing. Regular monitoring, reporting, and verification is very important. So that includes monitoring regularly every couple of years. Just one moment, please. Sorry, y'all, the postman was at the door. You might have heard my dog scratching. I really apologize about that. We were speaking about regular monitoring, reporting, and verification. Basically, carbon removal projects require that regular assessment takes place on mine land to make sure that trees are growing, to make sure that sequestration is taking place, and to make sure that the land is managed well. So that sort of thing rolls into what eventually becomes a carbon credit. It's the results of this regular assessment and also the documentation that goes into project planning. So that's administrative stuff. When it comes to the really exciting results of what we found related to multi-benefits, Adam, if you'll take us to the next slide, please.
Yeah, and sorry, I clicked, that was an oopsie forward.
Okay. Yeah, thank you. The multi-benefits are what got us really, really excited about what's possible with a project like this. We see social, economic, and environmental opportunity throughout the life stage of different forestry projects. And when it comes to Central Appalachia, this could mean a lot of really good things. First, moving into just a visual representation, because we've been talking about some pretty abstract concepts. Here is an image you'll also find in the white paper that sums up the results of what we've been able to learn. Basically, carbon credits and funds that might accrue as a result of selling those could be used to reclaim and reforest additional land. That's really exciting. When we think about the results and the reason for getting involved in an initiative that might be along these lines, we want to think about what's scalable, and so when it comes to being able to share the results into the future, this is a really exciting possibility. We also think about new jobs and recreation that might be possible as a result of planting, as a result of land access improvement. And then we also think about ecosystem services and what land restoration means for air, water quality, biodiversity, a lot of really important values related to environmental quality. So moving on, just to talk about the social and economic benefits that are possible as a result of a carbon removal project design. We could see investments in job training, as well as grants and revenue sharing that make the project possible locally, as well as land access agreements. We can plan for new outdoor recreation opportunities and then local job opportunities as a result of all this work that's taking place, both on the ground and administratively. This sort of possibility can be planned for effectively with community-based agreements between people managing the projects and local organizations too. So local organizations meaning community groups or governments, just folks who are planning where the money is going to go, where hiring is taking place, to ensure that community needs are met and community needs are represented from start to finish in reforestation. Environmentally, I think that some of the benefits of reforestation are self-evident. That includes trees growing, which enhances air quality. We can think about improved water quality, and also when it comes to the specific characteristics of mine land, decreased soil erosion is a big part of reforestation, and so is increased resilience of the land and surrounding communities to disturbances that might include extreme weather events, for example, floods or droughts, or other events that are related perhaps to climate change. So the land becomes more stable, especially as trees are rooted into the ground. And we'll see, as I mentioned, decreased soil erosion as a result, and also ecological and wildlife communities restored. That's something I think that people can easily get behind, as well as a strengthened biodiversity in communities that are reforested. As I mentioned too, we can think as well about what one project might mean for increasing mine reclamation and growing reforestation projects like this into the future. So with that, I want to conclude before we start the Q&A just with a recap that native ecosystems can be restored using the forestry reclamation approach. Carbon sequestration science exists. We know a lot about which species to use and what the most effective techniques are for sequestration, and carbon projects necessitate regular monitoring, reporting, and verification. And then multi-benefits are possible that project designers can be really creative about in the way that they ensure benefits for local communities, socially, economically, and environmentally. So we're pretty excited about the results of this work. And with that, I want to open the floor up to Adam and Alayna for maybe any last thoughts, and then a Q&A.
I'll have a last thought. And just to really reinforce from Appalachian Voices for our new economy program, the community-based work is work that we are doing, deeply rooted in multiple communities, particularly in Southwest Virginia, long-term, looking at, long-term planning in, historically coal-producing communities around, restorative economic and community development. And so for us, it's a question of, could a carbon removal project be a part of that long-term planning? Is that something that would be wanted and welcomed? And those are questions that, as we move forward with this work, we'll be excited to take to our partners, on the ground, our friends and neighbors in Southwest Virginia. But just to really point out that, that's work that we've really been doing, and so the carbon removal work would be layered onto existing redevelopment work. And then is that enough of a differentiator in the world of carbon credits is, would a carbon project that has that type of community engagement be special enough to be worth more money to the entity that would purchase it on the carbon market? Those are the sets of questions that we're really experimenting with, as Diana teed up really well.
All right, thanks, Adam. And I'm glad now to open the floor up to Q&A. I see some questions have already come into the chat now. Let's see. I see first from Amanda, more of a comment related to environmental justice and restorative justice when it comes to equity in hiring. And I want to thank you for that thoughtful contribution. It's definitely, I think, something that we all think about and is worthy inclusion and consideration for this project. I see Daniel asking, how is this coordinated with agencies and permits? That is such a good idea or a good question. It's such a good question and something that is really going to be specific for each site. So when it comes to who owns the land currently, that's really going to determine which agencies and permits are required. So whether that's owned, that land might be owned by a private entity, or whether it's owned by a nonprofit is going to impact a little bit of how, for example, we plan for land. We might plan for land access down the road. When it comes to permits, however, and the kind of guidance that we would be looking for, we'd really look to the Appalachian Regional Reforestation Initiative for the planting and reclamation guidelines. When it comes to permits, as far as verifying sequestration, those are my kinds of the things that I've explored the most, which is ecology and markets. If anyone else wants to speak maybe to permits that take place in between, please do.
Yeah.
But just to wrap up, go ahead.
Sure. And I think Aaron Savage, my colleague who authored the report that I mentioned earlier on, is on. So Aaron, I don't think you probably can't unmute yourself, but if you want to chat something in the questions, you're welcome to. Yeah, I think so. There's, with regard to agencies and permits, like there's the mining permits, and we're for this conversation, kind of two basic types of mines we'll be looking at. Bond released permits or bond released mine sites and bond forfeited sites. Bond released means that the mining has happened. It's gone through the state and federal regulations and requirements for reclamation. It's passed all its tests and it's been released and kind of can go on into being a landscape again. Some of those mines are done really well and trees are growing there. Other times reclamation doesn't work and there's a need to go back and do reforestation and an additional round of ecosystem restoration there. And that would be a different type of approach than if we're talking about a bond forfeited site, which is when I mentioned earlier the bonding crisis, where there's a coal company with a permit. That company went bankrupt and was not able to fulfill its legally required reclamation responsibilities. And then if there were not funds available at the state level, it would be in a state of bond forfeiture. And so that's kind of the concern that we have. That's a whole nother set of considerations. And the more I talk about that, the less I know and the more my colleague Erin knows. So again, I'll encourage her to jump in the chat if she wants to. But that's kind of at a high level, Dan, that's the two paths we're thinking about. And imagining it as we think about piloting a project like this, a recognition that it would be easier, at least at first, to do a proof of concept on a bond bond released site where there's not that forfeiture element. But knowing that if we want to bring this to scale and really tackle the problem of the bonding crisis, then we'll need to develop the model of how that's done in very close coordination with the state mining agencies in Virginia. It's Virginia Energy.
And I'll say too that at least when it comes to the carbon sequestration measurement, the credit creation itself, what we're talking about when we speak about carbon markets are really voluntary markets that we might be engaging with in the United States. And there are no federal, I would say, guidelines or requirements for carbon removal projects right now. So major verifiers really set their own. They're very similar, but they do differ in certain ways. So when a project is designed, it's best to really design with a specific verifier in mind, knowing that some basic principles are the same, but when it comes to, say, how regularly a site needs to be assessed, that sort of thing, that's going to depend on the verifier. And then the requirements for receiving accreditation to sell carbon credits on a market are also going to be slightly different by verifier. It's certainly our hope that the federal government or state governments might get a little bit more involved in setting requirements there. But right now, the best case is to work with a well-known and well-respected verifier when it comes to that kind of measurement and sequestration aspect of this. Carolyn asked who would hold carbon credits if her organization did work on privately owned land. I don't know that I can necessarily answer that question, but I know that it's probably going to be the landowner unless a really careful agreement is worked up between an organization doing the reclamation and the person holding the land. It's certainly possible to do that. And again, it probably really depends on the relationship that you might have with the landowner here. Ruth asked us what the name of the white paper is, and that is, let's see, reforestation on, or reforesting mine land, one nature-based solution for 2 deep problems. We can also drop a link to that in the chat here. It's available on our website in a PDF form, as well as a 1-page kind of summary document.
Yeah, Rand, do you mind dropping the link in the chat? And then anyone that registered should have had a clicky button on their email to go to the white paper, I think.
So Chet would like to know what the time frame for a project looks like, and is there a target date for actual reforestation? No, currently there is not a target date for trees to be in the ground. We do know that reclamation is a process that can take many months. When it comes to the carbon sequestration part of this, we're thinking about decades into the future, so at least 40 years, somewhere between 40 and 100, depending on the verifier and the type of project that we're designing. But we think about the time anyone who's interested in doing a project like this needs to think about a time frame, at least in the lifespan of like 1 generation of trees. Let's see. Joseph asks, with respect to additionality, where is the line that divides mine land reclamation obligations and bond releases, and where reforestation additionality begins beyond the permit obligations? So let me see if I understand that question. I think that you might be asking, is there a significant difference between mine land reclamation, like what reclamation actually requires as far as bond release land, and whether or not that might be different from what's required in a forestry carbon project? I'm I'm assuming related to permitting, that's what you might need. And I can answer confidently that it's up to us to follow the reclamation guidelines when it comes to project design. There isn't someone who's going to come down and say, you did or did not do this. It's more of a spectrum when it comes to the carbon market of demonstrating how effectively we've followed a certain guideline. So it's really attractive for buyers on the market to know both how carbon is sequestered, but then also how a project benefits a local community and how it's specific to what local community needs are. And community meaning environmental and social community. So if the requirements for reclamation say, and they do, advise trees as well as shrubs and native grasses to be planted rather than monoculture of the same trees. That's certainly what any project that we're involved in would follow. And even if that might make carbon sequestration measurement a little more complicated, that's certainly the method that we'd like to take. And that's the kind of result, as far as we understand, that buyers are most interested in the market too, is a project that's really specific to the communities where it takes place.
Diane, can I jump in on that one too?
Please.
Yeah, and just the point. I love all these questions, y'all. Holy cow, this is like the most engaged group of webinar attendees I've seen in years. So thanks for all the wonderful questions. With additionality, so much depends. It's a site-by-site consideration with sites that have already been reclaimed. As I mentioned, some of that reclamation sticks and sometimes it doesn't. So sometimes, even though it has been reclaimed, there's just not a lot of trees growing on it. The real kicker for additionality is for those bond forfeited sites that without some type of intervention will remain unreclaimed, for years and years, and at best will revert to like, autumn olive invasive overtaking, but not really any type of forest taking place. So I think that's really where the real juice is for additionality. Really great question.
So
we already answered the
go
bank.
ahead.
Yeah, I think we already answered the Dan's additional question on bank.
Okay, right. And then Kimberly also is commenting about this additionality concept. And certainly you're right when you talk about most successful projects for carbon removal, especially related to forestry, have traditionally taken place in developing countries. That's certainly what we've seen as well. And that is a result of a couple different things. So I won't speak to maybe what leads that trend to take place in developing nations as much as what makes our environment unique. And that is the amount of land that is available for reclamation, that needs reclamation, and is available to reforest. Technically, we can talk differently about how available different land is, but just speaking about the needs for mine land reclamation, that's a huge amount of land. And a lot of the forests maybe that are privately owned already in the United States would instead be looking at carbon removal projects related to improved management rather than reforestation. And that can have a pretty difficult bar to meet. So that's, I think, at least why we haven't seen reforestation projects take place here in a large scale, one of the reasons, and also why we're interested in doing it here. The additionality concept is really difficult to prove in most contexts. I think in this one, we have a really solid basis because we will be able to do very reasonable estimates on parcels of land and measure that growth very easily here in a way that's pretty cut and dry. So that's something that we've heard potential investors and advisors express a lot of excitement about. calculations for revenue. Calculations for revenue right now are a little difficult to be specific about, just because we don't, we have not yet solidified plans for funding. We know which pots of funding are available from different government sources and are exploring different types of grant resources as well as private investment. But the amount of revenue that we're looking at is really going to depend a bit on that, as well as the carbon market at the stage that carbon credit sales would take place, which is a couple years down the road. Right now, we're seeing exponential growth in the carbon market, and growth especially related to high quality credit projects with the kind of integrity and concepts that we've been talking about. There's a really robust interest in that sort of project. As far as the dollar value for those 5 years down the road, we've looked at a pretty wide range of estimates for that so far. But I think would you be comfortable saying a number, Adam?
Oh, sure. I mean, yeah, yeah. Sure.
Okay.
Yeah, if you are.
Okay.
You are.
Yeah. I mean, well, I was just going to be really general about a couple million, but yeah, I think somewhere between like what, 2 and 4. Yeah, $2 to $4 million. Like gross. Yeah. After credit sale. Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean,
rather than net. Yeah.
We're the range of what a metric ton of carbon will go for on the market is very wide ranging, from a few dollars to in our conversations we've run into folks claiming that they'll have carbon credits that will market for $100 and even more per ton. And that's so like where that number will actually fall is a tremendously important point for us, and trying to see if this concept will pencil out, and how much the market will bear for these really high carbon or high quality carbon credits. That's really kind of the heart of this inquiry, is what the market will bear.
Mm-hmm. And speaking of dollars and cents, I'm really glad, Link, that you brought up your question about how we envision the carbon market revenue ultimately flowing not to a landowner, but to locales. When you ask what landowner incentive there is to participate, that's something we've been thinking really deeply about when it comes to leasing versus buying land. And there are different project developers who are also maybe interested in similar projects and interested in engaging like private landowners, maybe on small scales. But what we're thinking about is a little different, from say like a 20 to 40 year land lease. That's certainly up for consideration, but so too is buying land, which is really exciting to think about, and pretty novel. But if we add that into the suite of options, if land is owned by a nonprofit or community group, that opens up a great deal of options for revenue sourcing and directing where exactly the money goes. So that's our thinking along those lines.
And going back to the bond forfeited, which is one of the key problems we're trying to solve for, the incentive for permit holders or landholders would be that that federally required reclamation could happen through this model, and it would add value to the land long term. So it comes down to a dollars and cents question, making it financially appealing to particularly a private landowner. And then that question of how to make sure that localities and local communities receive economic benefit from it is really at the heart of what we're trying to do, and that the model that we're trying to build. So it's a really great question. Thanks for asking it, Link.
I see Saskia as well is really curious about some of the leading Appalachian community groups that developers interested in a project like this ought to be partnering with. And, you know, one of the first groups that springs to mind is, you know, experts who are already involved in reforesting my land, our friends at Green Forest Work. But they're also, I'm gonna kind of let Adam maybe take this one, given that your involvement is very longstanding in your relationships with community groups. But I would say that of Appalachian community groups interested in doing a project like this, this is novel. What we're doing is quite novel. There aren't other nonprofits in this region kind of exploring this, along with connections to environmental justice.
Sure. Yeah, I'd add that really the peer space where we're talking about this with other groups across the region is the Central Appalachian Network. There's an ecological restoration working group that we're talking about this on a monthly basis. Groups like the Nature Conservancy, their West Virginia chapter in particular, Rural Action Ohio, Coalfield Development, Mountain Association in Kentucky. You know, that's where my mind goes to for Saskia, and cannetwork.org is the website for that network. And then there's also other smaller community groups that come to mind depending on you know where exactly. And that'd be a long list, and happy to chat about it next time we chat. You want me to take the next one, Diana?
Please.
Okay. So the question is, where does the money come to buy the land or the rights to the land? You know, one of the questions that we have is, you know, our vision is that we help, you know, through collaboration and partnership to work to develop a model that is replicable at scale across the region and maybe beyond, that is self-sustaining, where you know the revenues generated from the carbon market are enough to buy the land and do the reclamation and reforestation. So long term, we hope that the money is, you know, comes from public and private investments that see it as a return on that investment. In the more immediate term, recognizing that that's a risky proposition, that may not work. And so what we're looking at in the near term is looking at state, federal, and private philanthropy to pilot the notion, do a proof of concept, and kind of internalize that risk with our nonprofit structure, so then we can, you know, work to contribute that what we learn to the community of practice around forest reclamation. So to sum up, you know, grants now, the market later.
Joseph, I think your question is next, which is there an example of a forest carbon project where a credit sale revenue provides a direct financial return? Yes, there are. Most of those are in developing countries. I'd be glad to like share the link on Facebook and maybe follow up with some great examples. I'm thinking of a couple in particular, and there are definite examples of projects that are designed with that specific benefit in mind, and they've been received really well, again, as we've mentioned before, on the market. Sue, when it comes to specific plans or strategies and resilience of wildlife, we do not have specific plans or strategies yet, but we will be following all of the guidelines from the forestry reclamation approach, which does speak to that aspect in particular of restoration. And I'm really excited about learning more about that particular area. Thanks for that question. Kimberly asks if we have potential buyers of the credits identified already. And she assumes they may include foreign buyers. We do not have potential buyers of the credits identified already, no. But our understanding is that we are going to be able to make that determination where they go to and who they are sold to. So I think that is also a topic that came up in some email feedback we've received on the white paper since it was released last week, was interest in who will be buying credits, and that is to say, like, whose emissions might be accounted for or credited. And that is a decision that we'll be able to make ourselves. Let's see.
Diana, we might just have time for one more question. Do you want to?
I think so. Yeah.
Dave, and we'll end it there.
And Kimberly, if you have ideas for credit buyers, we'd love to talk about it. Let's see. Thank you all for your engagement with this webinar. It's super, super gratifying and very exciting. And I look forward to being part of the team that shares next updates. So thank you very much. If I see Shelby asking how individuals who are excited about projects like this can stay in touch with progress of the work, I would recommend joining the email listserv for App Voices, as well as following and liking on social media.
Just quick, while we're wrapping, amazing work, Diana. Thank you for leading our team and publishing this white paper. So excited to be at this point with the work. Thanks for the excellent work, and thanks to the whole Appalachian Voices communications team for supporting us on this webinar today and the white paper publication. So fun to work with such an awesome team. Diana and I will be at the West Virginia Carbon Summit next week for folks here that might be there. So excited to continue the conversation there for anybody that will be there.
Yeah, thank you all very much. This has been a wonderful webinar, and I'm so glad that y'all were here. Look forward to sharing more updates soon. Thank you.
Thanks, y'all. Best webinar in years for sure.
Bye.